All right, looking at our notes, does everybody have a copy of the syllabus for tonight? Good, let's get right into it. The first statement, and I've been starting off each part of this series with these two statements. We must always remember that Paul's message is his. Please understand that, brothers and sisters. Paul, says that his message was fabricated, created by him, and him alone. All right, now y'all ought to know these verses by heart now. Let's turn to them anyway. Romans 2:16. Romans 2:16. It says these words, "In the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to" whose gospel? That's right. It says it there plain as day. Circle that word "my." It's right there. Okay? Let's look at the 16th chapter now. Romans 16:25. Romans 16:25. It says, "Now to him that is of power to establish you according to" whose gospel? There he says it again. Not according to the gospel that I was taught, but according to the gospel that I made up. Okay? Let's look at 2 Timothy 2:8. 2 Timothy 2:8. I always start at the 7th verse when I'm reading this passage. It says, "Consider what I say." In other words, Timothy, I want you to give some thought to what I'm telling you here. And that which does not make sense to you, God will help you to understand it. That's what he's saying here. Okay? And the Lord give you the understanding in all things. Remember, look at the 8th verse. "Remember," notice what he says, "remember that Jesus Christ of the seed of David was raised from the dead according to" what? There it is, people. He says it plainly. All right, now you must understand that according to the biblical text, the Apostle Paul was literally the first person to start preaching this concept of Jesus being raised from the dead. Please understand that. Okay? Let's turn to 2 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, the 16th verse. 2 Corinthians 12:16. 2 Corinthians 12:16. It says these words, "But be it so, I did not burden you." Now this is the part I want you to underline if you haven't done it in your Bibles. "Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you with" what? With guile, right? In other words, he's saying here, nevertheless, all right, being as smooth as I am, all right, I caught you with trickery. That's the other word for guile. All right? Yeah, buddy. Let's look back at Romans, the 3rd chapter here. And I want you to read something where the brother actually confesses to telling a lie. Romans 3:7. Romans 3:7. It says, "For if the truth of God hath more abounded through my lie unto his glory." Okay? I mean, this is deep. You know, I mean, like when I first read these, I tried to read around them. I tried to make them fit into the text, but it's exactly as it said. You know, if the truth of God has abounded, in other words, if as a result of me lying to you, you are ending up doing the very things that you need to be doing while y'all passing judgment on me. Okay? That's what he's in essence saying here. Okay? Note, it is very important to understand that the underlying purpose of the Pauline epistles in the Bible, again I state the underlying purpose of the Pauline epistles in the Bible, that is that the Gentiles, and who are the Gentiles? The Europeans. Yes. See, again, people, for those of you who have been taught, like I have been taught, that there are only two classes of people in the world, Jew and Gentile, that's not true. You were taught that because they don't want you to know that you are a class of people. In fact, you were taught that because they don't want you to know that you were the first class of people. You were taught that because they don't want you to know that you are the original people. All right? And everything on this planet comes from us. So therefore, they had to teach us that there were two classes of people, the Jew and the Gentile, and black folk ain't neither one of them. From the biblical perspective. All right? That is that the Gentiles do not have to keep God's laws to be justified or put in right standing with God, but their faith literally causes them to become heirs of the promise that God made to Abraham. I added some verses here in tonight's lesson to conclude this series with. Let's look at them carefully. We're already in Romans, right? Turn to the 9th chapter, verse 30 and 31. Again, keeping in mind, what are we looking at here? The teaching that the Gentiles or the Europeans do not have to keep God's law to be made right with God. Keeping that in mind, let's look at Romans 9 verse 30. What shall we say then? That the Gentiles or the Europeans which followed not after righteousness. Now, brothers and sisters, that is right there in the book. It tells you right there in the book that the Gentiles were an unrighteous people. Or they still are an unrighteous people. That the Gentiles, which did not live according to righteousness, which did not live in accordance with the laws of God, have attained to righteousness, even the righteousness which is of faith. Y'all see that? Transliterated, what that means as the Europeans, who were a very unrighteous people, ungodly, didn't follow God's laws, have become righteous, not by doing the right thing, but by exercising faith in this gospel that Paul was preaching. 31st verse. But Israel, who was following righteousness, after the law of righteousness, God does not see them as righteous. See what it says? Have not attained to the law of righteousness. That's deep. 32nd verse. Why or wherefore? Because they sought it not by faith. In other words, the 32nd verse is saying very clearly that no matter how hard you try to live right, no matter how hard you try to do the right thing, no matter how much energy you put in treating people right and loving your brothers and your sisters and following the principles of ma'at, truth, justice, harmony, balance, and uprightness, no matter how much you do that, if you don't believe what Paul taught, you still ain't righteous before God. That's deep. Look at the 11th chapter. Go over a couple of chapters. Yes. Right, brother, write your questions down, and I'll address them because the tape is rolling, and I want to get all this on tape. That's okay, man. But write your question down, and I'll address them at the end, okay? Romans, the 11th chapter, verse 11. Now, I'm going to read quickly here, brothers and sisters, because it's got to go all the way to the 27th verse. Notice what it says. And if some of the branches be broken off. Now, so you really get the gist of what's happening here. Paul is using the analogy, or the allegory, rather,